Carney's picking fights with Trump on the idea that he can run against Trump again. Good luck with that. Even the elbows up seniors aren't that stupid, I hope.
Welcome back to Behind the Headlines. Donald Trump just threatened 100% tariff on everything. And what is the Prime Minister doing? Well, he's running and hiding, unsurprisingly. We're going to give you the real story behind the headlines. So please do us a small favor, help us beat the algorithm, hit that like button, drop a comment, and please, most of all, subscribe. You'll need to stay to the very end because the government just quietly posted a massive wave of new job openings for a potential election. We've got the receipts, so let's get right into it. This week, President Trump put Canada on notice. If Mark Carney's EV deal with China goes through, every Canadian export will be hit with 100% tariff. And Trump is even trolling Mark Carney with the label governor. We weren't just warned. Trump's team told us last week that this wouldn't end well for Carney, and now Canada is suffering the consequences. So now let's look at this very first clip.
Begin with some breaking news this morning. U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening to impose a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods entering the United States. In a post on social media, he says if Governor Carney thinks he is going to make Canada drop off port for China to send goods and products into the United States, he is sorely mistaken. China will eat Canada alive, completely devour it, including the destruction of their businesses, social fabric, and general way of life. If Canada makes a deal with China, it will immediately be hit with a 100% tariff against all Canadian goods and products coming into the USA. This post comes just over a week after Trump said this about the Canada-China agreement.
If you can get a deal with China, you should do that.
Okay, and so Friday I had a whole show planned, and then we had to throw it out the window because of this one Truth Social post. What's your reaction to this?
Trump knows that China is the #1 threat to the United States, and Carney's timing of the China visit was a political move, like Lucy pulling the ball away from Trump. Carney's flirting with a communist dictator rather than making a deal with the U.S. Canada will pay the price for pissing off Trump. It won't be an invasion. It will be the end of 2 million jobs that rely on free trade with the United States.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that, Canada has been effing around for too long, and we're about to find out. People have akin to know this presidency as it's the F around and find out presidency. And don't take my word for it. Just look at the official White House Instagram. But this also proves my point from last week that Trump was maximalizing his options. The U.S. is right to be concerned. While Carney cuts EV deals in China, Russia has built over 30 active military bases in the Arctic and a fleet of 40 icebreakers. In Canada, we have 8 bases and a fleet that is essentially a rounding error. I learned last week that Russia is already mapping undersea cables that carry 99% of our data between North America and Europe, and they're looking to find a way to shut that off completely. And if Carney thinks that this is boring, well, he's just not out of his league. He's a liability to our national security. Well, the commander of the Elbows Up Brigade just says, if we keep our elbows up, then that'll solve everything. But let's look at how Mark Carney is handling this pressure. Friday in Quebec, when asked about the collapsing relationship with our biggest ally, a crisis affecting every single Canadian paycheck, Carney put new meaning to dodging the question. A press conference with the podium already set up for the Prime Minister was canceled 25 minutes before it was scheduled. And what could be more important than what they themselves call a crisis, you ask? Well, according to a political reporter, a private dinner in Ottawa. So let's take a look at this.
Oh, that's the most boring question. Okay, what else did you
Nothing. Okay, Ian. It's getting boring now. What do you think?
Mr. Elbows Up has become a scaredy cat. He's just like a frightened frat boy once he kicks sand in the face of the most powerful man in the world. He's running and hiding. There are no Canadian jobs from China from his trip, just promises. There's no pipeline to get the oil to China, thanks to Carney. It's all smoke and mirrors. And what about getting money from Arab countries that treat women like second-class citizens? Carney's values, including kissing up to dictators who kill their opponents, are not Canadian values. In addition, even the world leaders are starting to turn on him over in Davos. After his speech, the president of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, and the head of the European Bank, Christine Lagarde, both publicly dissed Charlie after his speech. He's running out of friends that aren't dictators.
Yeah, I completely agree. After his disastrous reaction and his clear attempts to provoke Donald Trump, I do not think that there is any doubt that they are planning to go to an election this year. And I was talking with my father-in-law last night, and something came to mind. And that is that I think that Mark Carney and his team made a deliberate calculation on Friday night and even Saturday. I would not be surprised if Saturday was a planned day off, which he's entitled to after a long trip, and that they decided to just let this Truth Social post fester and permeate throughout the country. But I've seen a lot of the media coverage on this, and I honestly think that the talking heads and even some conservatives have it all wrong. They're calling Mark Carney's trip a success because he read a teleprompter and he didn't trip and didn't go into these grand overtures of nothingness. Well, let's take a look at it for a second. Since Mark Carney took office, he has jet-setted on 15 international trips, mostly to sign MOUs and shovel money towards foreign interests, while Canadians are bleeding at home. Food banks are hitting a record 2.2 million visits in a single month. But it honestly leaves everybody asking, how many more people have to lose their jobs or their homes before this government says enough is enough and it's time to get serious about the problems that are facing this country? Do you have anything else to add, Ian?
Well, just today, when the House resumed, he tried to steal another one of Pierre's main issues, affordability. But it didn't help affordability. It's a drop in the bucket with what people are facing out there.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we'll talk about that more next week. There's going to be plenty to talk about the House returning. But yeah, so we'll move on to our next segment. The reaction from our biggest trade partner hasn't just been negative. It's been scathing, coming from the very top of the new administration. So let's take a look at this clip.
In the U.S., the more than our northern neighbor.
That's even with all the oil and the natural resources coming out of Canada. Texas is still larger.
Well, look, Alberta is a wealth of natural resources, but they won't let them build a pipeline to the Pacific.
You got that right.
I think we should let them come down into the U.S., and Alberta is a natural partner for the U.S. They have great resources. The Albertans are very independent people. Rumored that they may have a referendum on whether they want to stay in Canada or not.
Sounds like you may know something up there.
People are saying, people
are talking.
People are talking.
Okay, Ian, so what's your reaction to the Treasury Secretary there?
Well, this is a full court press against Canada. Not only the Treasury Secretary, but the ambassador to Canada and several other senior people in the Trump administration have for weeks now been taking shots at Canada. Trump talks about new tariffs against Canada because the U.S. sees China, as I said earlier, as their number one military threat. The Treasury Secretary is now trolling Canada about Alberta becoming the 51st state. They don't want the rest of Canada because the rest of Canada would vote woke Democrat.
Yeah, I think you're completely correct. But more specifically, this week, the media and even Carney himself have reacted to Trump with pure emotion instead of being the adults in the room. And we're not going to sit here and fan the flames of fear by indulging in this sovereignty mess. The 51st state talk, as I've said from the very beginning, going back to baby Trudeau, it's a strategic troll, and they know that this is going to grab attention. And an American invasion is a conspiracy theory cooked up by liberal media kooks to distract you from the real threat. And Scott Bessent knows this. You could see the calculation in his face as he's talking. He's the U.S. Treasury Secretary, and as he stated this week, his focus isn't on annexing Canada, but it's about stopping this Chinese EV deal, which cuts tariffs from 100% to 6.1% for 49,000 Chinese vehicles. Now, Bessent even pointed out the hypocrisy. Carney preaches about democracy in Davos while handing nearly $1 billion in federal credits to Chinese state-subsidized companies. Now, it's clear that the U.S. is not looking for a war. They never have been. They're just looking for a partner who isn't a backdoor to Beijing. And after all, I don't think that is that much to ask for. Let's move on to our third and our final segment. This week, all the mainstream media is saying what we said a month ago. And that is a spring election in 2026 might actually be happening. So maybe they're one of the people who's watching our shows. I don't know. But in all seriousness, a sharp-eyed subscriber alerted us to a wave of Election Canada job postings that happened over the last few weeks. Now, to be fair, alongside of this, Statistics Canada went live with 32,000 openings for the May 2026 census. Now, the timing and the volume have people wondering, is this just a routine data collection, or is this the machinery of Elections Canada being greased for a trip to the polls? Let's take a look at this clip earlier this weekend from Nick Nanos on CTV.
I think there's probably a good chance that the Liberals might want an election this year. The
Ditto.
thing is that the trade talks are not going very well. And
Nope.
when we do have a trade agreement,
What trade
that might
talks?
be, it's probably not going to be as good as our current arrangement. And defending a trade agreement that's not as good would be difficult for any government.
So, Ian, I think the mainstream media is starting to catch on. What say you?
Well, they're obviously listening to what we have to say behind the headlines. Carney has instructed Elections Canada to start hiring people for an election. That's how it works up in Ottawa. The government has to instruct them, okay, start hiring now. And Carney's picking fights with Trump on the idea that he can run against Trump again. This instead of making a trade deal with the U.S. like he promised in the last election. Good luck with that. Even the elbows up seniors aren't that stupid, I hope. The polls show today that he's neck and neck with the Conservatives. Voters will say, fool me once, don't fool me again. The only question is not if, but when we have this election.
While we're on the topic of polling, according to the latest Abacus data, the Liberals and Conservatives are deadlocked nationally at 41% to 39% among likely voters. They've successfully made Trump a top-tier issue again for 35% of Canadians. And for the specific slice of the electorate, the boomers and the university graduates, it's working. While the Liberals play the fear card, 2/3 of Canadians actually support an election if it leads to a stable majority to end this chaos, or whatever you call it. Ian, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, except watch what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks.
Yes, I completely agree, and we're going to be covering it all here on Behind the Headlines. Thank you guys so much for listening and tuning in. Appreciate all the support. Catch you in the next one.